The locomotive's whistle pierced the cold morning air as the eastbound train prepared to depart Larkspur Station. Steam billowed from the engine, mixing with the frost that hung heavy in the February dawn. The platform was nearly empty, just a few early risers and the station master checking his pocket watch for the third time. Then, from the muddy main street, a figure emerged through the mist. A man, broad-shouldered and weathered, wearing a thick wool coat that had seen better winters. His boots struck the wooden planks with purpose as he strode past the station house, past the luggage carts, and straight onto the tracks. The engineer saw him first. "What in blazes?" He yanked the whistle cord, sending another shriek into the morning. But the man didn't move. Instead, he raised one hand, palm out, like he was stopping a spooked horse. Metal screamed against metal as the brakeman threw his weight against the lever. The train shuddered, lurched, and ground to a halt mere yards from where the man stood. Passengers pressed their faces to frost-covered windows, craning to see what fool would risk his life to stop a train. The conductor jumped down, face red with fury. "Wyatt Langston, have you lost your damn mind? You could have—" "She's on this train. Tom?" Wyatt's voice was steady, but his eyes searched the windows with an urgency that made the conductor step back. "I know she is. Who's on the—" But Wyatt was already moving, walking alongside the cars, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. The passengers watched him pass a ghost of a man looking for something or someone he'd already lost. Then, from the last passenger car, a door opened. She stepped down carefully, one gloved hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a worn leather valise. Her traveling dress was practical wool, dark blue and unadorned. No bustle, no frills. Eastern fashion stripped down to Western necessity. She was tall for a woman, nearly matching the conductor's height, with dark hair pinned severely back and a face that some might call handsome rather than pretty. Clara Jean Whitlock had the kind of face that told the truth even when words wouldn't. She stood on the bottom step, looking at the man who'd stopped a train for her. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many days squinting into the sun and too many nights staring at an empty pillow. Wyatt Langston. Her voice carried the precise diction of St. Louis society, though something in it had roughened, like silk that had been washed in lye soap. He nodded, pulling off his hat despite the cold. "Miss Whitlock." "I didn't expect you to come." She descended the last step, her boots finding the gravel with a certainty that belied the tremor in her voice. "I almost let you go." The words came out raw, honest. Train was pulling out when I realized I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Again. The conductor cleared his throat. "Wyatt, I got a schedule to keep. Is she staying or going?" Clara looked back at the train, then at Wyatt. Her fingers tightened on the valise handle. Behind her, she could hear the other passengers murmuring, see the steam building pressure in the engine. One step backward, and she could return to the life she'd planned, governess to some wealthy family in San Francisco. Respectable employment for a woman of her age and circumstances. "I came for the position," she said carefully, "to teach your son." That was our arrangement. It was. Wyatt took a step closer, and she could smell wood smoke and leather, the particular scent of a man who worked with his hands. "But if you're willing, I'd like to discuss different terms." The engineer blew the whistle again. Impatient, Clara studied Wyatt's face, the weathered skin, the gray-blue eyes that looked at her straight on, not through her or around her like men in St. Louis had done once they'd learned of her family's misfortune. "My trunk," she said finally. "It's in the luggage car." Wyatt's shoulders dropped with relief he tried to hide. He gestured to a young man loitering near the station. "Billy, help me get Miss Whitlock's trunk down." As they retrieved her belongings, one modest trunk and a carpet bag, Clara remained by the tracks, watching the train that would have carried her away. The conductor climbed back aboard, shaking his head. Woman troubles, he muttered to the engineer. Mark my words, that'll end poorly. But Clara heard only the hiss of releasing brakes, the chug of the engine finding its rhythm again. The train pulled away, leaving her standing on a wooden platform in a town she'd never seen, with a man she knew only from 3 carefully worded letters. Your son, she said as Wyatt returned with her trunk balanced on one shoulder. Thomas, you wrote 5 years old. Toby. He goes by Toby. Wyatt set the trunk down gently. He's been quiet since his mother passed. 2 years now. I'm not particularly good with children. It seemed important to say it now, before they went any further. I've tutored them, yes, but I don't coddle. I don't need someone to coddle him. Wyatt's voice was firm. I need someone who'll be straight with him, who'll stay. The last word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara had been left before by a fiancé who'd discovered her father's bankruptcy, by friends who'd decided she was too tall, too plain-spoken, too much herself. She'd learned to leave first, to keep her bags packed and her expectations low. The position, she said, needing to establish the boundaries before they blurred. Room and board, plus the salary we discussed. Through spring term. He agreed, though something in his eyes suggested he was hoping for longer. He picked up her valise with his free hand. Wagons this way. They walked through the awakening town, past the general store where Mr. Hendricks was sweeping his steps, past the boarding house where curtains twitched at windows. Clara kept her chin up, her stride steady. She'd learned long ago that apologizing for her height only made people notice it more. The wagon was practical, like everything else she'd seen of Wyatt Langston. Well-maintained but unadorned, with a bench seat worn smooth by use. He helped her up, his hand firm and calloused under her glove, then loaded her trunk in the back. It's 3 miles to the ranch, he said, climbing up beside her. Roads rough in places. I don't mind rough roads. Clara arranged her skirts and settled her hands in her lap. I mind dishonesty and cruelty. Everything else is manageable. Wyatt glanced at her as he took up the reins. That why you answered my advertisement? Most women would think a widower with a child was burden enough without adding ranch work. Most women have options. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. She softened them with truth. I needed work. You needed help. It seemed practical. Practical, he repeated, and she thought she heard amusement in it. Well, Miss Whitlock, I hope you'll find us practical enough. They rode in silence for a while, the wheels creaking over frozen ruts. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open land that rolled toward mountains still white with snow. Clara had never seen country like this, so vast it made her chest tight, so empty it seemed full of possibility. There, Wyatt said finally, pointing with the reins. That's home. The ranch house sat on a small rise, sheltered by cottonwoods on the north side. It was built of logs, solid and square, with a stone chimney already sending up smoke. A barn stood to the east, and she could see fence lines marking off pastures where a few horses grazed. It's not fancy, Wyatt said, and she heard the apology in it. It's standing, Clara replied. In my experience, that's what matters. As they drew closer, she saw movement at one of the windows, a small face pressed against the glass, there and gone like a deer in the brush. That's him, Wyatt said unnecessarily. He'll be shy at first. Good. Clara straightened her shoulders. I prefer honest shyness to false charm. Wyatt pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. He turned to look at her fully for the first time since she'd stepped off the train. Why did you really come? Miss Whitlock, you could have found work in St. Louis even after what happened. Clara met his gaze steadily. Because in St. Louis, I would always be the banker's daughter who fell from grace, the woman who couldn't hold on to her fiancé. Here, she looked at the house, the mountains, the endless sky. Here, I can be someone who teaches a child his letters and helps with the washing and maybe, if I'm lucky, becomes necessary to someone." "You already are," Wyatt said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "That is, we need someone. Have for a long time." He jumped down and came around to help her from the wagon. As her feet touched the ground, the front door opened a crack. Clara could see one blue eye peering out, curious despite itself. "Hello, Toby," she called, not moving toward him. "I'm Miss Whitlock. Your father tells me you like stories about trains." The door opened a little wider. It was a beginning, Clara thought. Not the one she'd planned when she'd boarded the train in St. Louis, not the one she'd imagined during the long journey west, but standing there in the February morning, with the mountains watching and a silent child deciding whether to trust her. She thought it might be the beginning she needed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist, revealing the hard, beautiful country that would test her in ways St. Louis society never could. Clara picked up her valise and walked toward the house, toward the child, toward whatever came next. Behind her, Wyatt gathered her trunk, and she heard him murmur something that might have been a prayer or might have been simply, "Please stay." The first night in the Langston house. Clara lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds, wind rattling the windows, the settling of logs, the distant howl of coyotes, in her narrow bed in what had been Margaret Langston's sewing room. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of woman had slept in the larger bedroom down the hall, had cooked at that cast-iron stove, had loved the man who now moved quietly through the house like he was afraid of waking ghosts. She'd learned about being left behind long before she'd boarded that westbound train. It had started with small things. Richard Hartwell taking longer to call on her, his letters growing shorter, more formal. Then came the excuses business meetings that ran late, his mother's sudden illnesses that required his attention. Clara had told herself she was imagining things, that her father's financial troubles hadn't changed how Richard saw her. She'd been wearing her mother's pearl earrings the night he finally told her. They'd sat in the parlor of her aunt's house, the only relative who'd taken her in after the bank failed, and Richard had held her hands like he was afraid she might shatter. "You must understand," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Mother believes that is, my position at the firm requires a wife with a dowry." Clara had finished for him. "And a father who isn't known throughout St. Louis as the banker who lost everything. It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" She'd pulled her hands free, surprised at how steady they were. "You need a wife who brings connection and capital. I bring neither." Richard had the grace to look ashamed. "You're being crude." "I'm being honest. Something you might try." He'd left then, taking with him 2 years of courtship and the future she'd built in her mind, a house on Lafayette Square. Children who would attend the best schools, a life that followed the prescribed patterns of St. Louis society. The gossip had been worse than the heartbreak. Whispers followed her at church, at the market, even at the school where she'd found work teaching. Poor Clara Whitlock. Too tall anyway, and that sharp tongue, no wonder he reconsidered. She'd endured it for 3 years. 3 years of genteel poverty, of mending gloves until the fabric wouldn't hold another stitch, of teaching other people's children while knowing she'd likely never have her own. She was 28 now, firmly on the shelf by society's standards. In St. Louis, she'd become a cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. Don't be too clever, too tall, too much yourself, or you'll end up like the Whitlock girl. The advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like Providence itself. Widower with young son seeks educated woman for governess position. Ranch setting. Must be patient, practical, and willing to stay through spring term. Room, board, and generous salary. She'd written that very day, her pen steady as she outlined her qualifications education at Miss Pemberton's Academy. 3 years teaching experience, excellent references. She hadn't mentioned her broken engagement or her father's disgrace. What did those things matter in Wyoming territory? Wyatt's response had been prompt and businesslike. He'd explained about his son, about his wife's passing, about the isolation of ranch life. I'll be frank, Miss Whitlock, he'd written, "The position has been difficult to fill. 2 governesses have already come and gone, finding the life too hard and my son too withdrawn. If you're looking for comfort in society, you won't find it here." "I'm looking for work and respect," she'd written back. "If you can offer those, I can manage without comfort and society." Now, listening to footsteps in the hallway, Wyatt checking on his son, she guessed Clara wondered if she'd been too confident. The boy had barely spoken 3 words at dinner, and Wyatt had seemed almost as tongue-tied. They'd eaten in near silence, the clink of forks on plates unnaturally loud. Morning came gray and cold. Clara, dressed in her most serviceable dress, pinned her hair severely back, and ventured into the kitchen. Wyatt was already there, stoking the stove. "Coffee," he offered, not turning around. "Please." She moved to the window, looking out at the frosted landscape. "What time does Toby usually wake?" "Soon. He doesn't sleep much." Wyatt poured 2 cups, handed her one. "Neither of us do, since—" He stopped, started again. "I should tell you about Margaret, so you understand." Clara sat at the scrubbed pine table, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Only what you think I need to know." He sat across from her, his own coffee untouched. She was everything I wasn't, gentle, patient, always knew the right thing to say. Toby adored her. We both did. He paused, studying his hands. "The fever took her 2 winters ago. Came on fast. Nothing the doctor could do. Toby was with her when he saw too much for a boy his age." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. But Clara had learned that sometimes inadequate words were better than none. "The other governesses, they tried to mother him, tried to be her." Wyatt looked up. "That's not what I'm asking of you." "Good," Clara said firmly. "Because I couldn't be her even if I tried. I'm too tall, too plain, and too fond of saying exactly what I think." A ghost of a smile crossed Wyatt's face. "Margaret was beautiful, delicate, like those flowers she tried to grow here that always died come winter. But you know what survives out here, sage and juniper and buffalo grass. Things with deep roots and toughness to spare." Before Clara could respond, she heard small feet on the stairs. Toby appeared in the doorway, still in his nightshirt, dragging a wooden train engine by a string. "Good morning, Toby," Clara said, keeping her voice neutral. "Would you like some breakfast?" The boy looked at his father, then at her. "Papa makes the porridge." "Then Papa should continue making the porridge," Clara agreed. "But perhaps you could show me where things are kept. I'll need to learn my way around." Toby considered this. Then, still clutching his train, he padded over to a cupboard. "Bowls," he said, pointing. "Thank you." Clara rose, opened the cupboard. "And spoons." "For the next few minutes." Toby silently directed her to various items while Wyatt prepared breakfast. It wasn't conversation. Exactly. But it was communication. Clara had learned with her students in St. Louis that sometimes silence was just another language that needed translating. After breakfast, she set up a makeshift classroom at the kitchen table. Toby watched warily as she unpacked her books, a primer, a slate, some colored pencils she'd saved from her teaching supplies. "We'll start simple," she announced. "Letters and numbers. Can you write your name?" Toby shook his head. "Would you like to learn?" A tiny nod. Clara wrote Toby on the slate in clear, bold letters. "This is you, written down. These marks mean you exist, that you're important enough to be recorded." The boy traced the letters with one finger, his face solemn. Then he looked up at her with eyes just like his father's. "Can you write Mama?" Clara's hand stilled. Across the room, where he was mending harness, Wyatt went very quiet. "I can," Clara said carefully. She wrote Margaret below his name. "There. Now you can see both names together." Toby studied the slate like it held secrets. "She's not coming back." "No," Clara agreed. "She's not." "The other ladies said she went to heaven." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his small fingers gripped the pencil too tightly. "They said I should be happy because she's with angels, but I'm not happy." "Of course you're not," Clara said. "It's not happy when someone we love goes away and can't come back. Anyone who says otherwise is trying to make themselves feel better, not you." Wyatt made a sound surprise or approval. She couldn't tell. Toby looked at her with new interest. "You're different," he announced. "Yes?" Clara agreed. "I am. Is that acceptable to you?" The boy thought about it, then nodded. "Can you teach me to write train?" They worked on letters until Toby's attention wandered. Then Clara suggested he show her around the ranch. Wyatt looked uncertain. "She needs to know the place," Toby said with 5-year-old logic, "so she doesn't get lost." They bundled up against the cold Clara in her worn wool coat, Toby in layers that made him look like a small, determined bear. He led her to the barn first, introducing the horses with careful formality. "That's Duchess. She was Mama's, but now Papa rides her. That's Buck. He bites." "I'll remember that," Clara said gravely. They visited the chicken coop, where Toby collected eggs with practiced care. They examined the garden plot, now dormant under snow. Mama grew tomatoes, he informed her. "And beans. Papa doesn't know how." "Neither do I," Clara admitted, "but there are books that could teach us, come spring." "You'd learn from a book," Toby seemed skeptical. "I've learned most everything from books. Cooking, sewing, teaching. Books are just other people's knowledge written down for us to use." They were heading back to the house when Toby stopped suddenly. "You don't smell like roses." Clara blinked. "I beg your pardon. The other ladies smelled like roses. Mama smelled like bread and soap. You smell like—" He frowned, searching for words. "Like ink and winter." "Is that bad?" He shook his head. "It's just different." That evening, after Toby was in bed, Clara found Wyatt on the porch despite the cold, staring out at the darkening sky. "He talked to you," he said without preamble, "more than he's talked to anyone in months." "Children often talk when you don't try to make them." Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "Mr. Langston, I should be clear about something. I'm not here to replace your wife. I can't be a mother to your son. I'm here to teach and help with household duties. Nothing more." "I know." His voice was quiet. "That's why I think this might work. You're not trying to fill a space that can't be filled. You're just being yourself." "Myself hasn't always been what people wanted," Clara said, thinking of Richard, of the whispers in St. Louis, of all the ways she'd been found lacking. Wyatt turned to look at her then, and in the dim light from the kitchen window, she could see something in his face that made her breath catch. "Maybe you've been around the wrong people." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Finally, Clara bid him good night and went inside, but she lay awake again, thinking about roots and survival, about the difference between roses and winter, about a man who seemed to see her, all of her, the too tall, too sharp, too much herself parts, and didn't look away. The house revealed itself to Clara in layers, like pages in a book she was slowly learning to read. The kitchen with its massive iron stove and worn pine table, the sitting room where Margaret's rocking chair still sat by the window, unused but not removed, the narrow stairs that creaked on the 3rd and 7th step, and everywhere, the careful emptiness where a woman's touch had been no doilies or cushions, no flowers dried in vases, no samplers on the walls. Clara's own room was sparse but sufficient. A narrow bed with a log cabin quilt, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, a small wardrobe that held her 3 dresses with room to spare. The window looked east toward the mountains, and mornings brought light that made even this plain space feel blessed. It was the third week when she finally ventured into what had been Margaret's domain, the bedroom at the end of the hall. Wyatt had asked her to fetch an extra blanket from the chest there, and though he'd offered to get it himself, Clara had seen the tightness around his eyes. "I'll manage," she'd said simply. The room smelled of cedar and absinthe. The bed was made with military precision, a wedding ring quilt smoothed flat as glass. On the dresser sat a silver brush and mirror set, a photograph in a carved frame, and a small wooden box. Clara moved to the window first, looking out at the same view Wyatt must see each morning rolling pasture, the barn, the endless sky. "That's her." Clara turned. Toby stood in the doorway, pointing at the photograph. "Would you like to show me?" Clara asked, keeping her voice neutral. The boy padded over and picked up the frame with careful hands. The woman in the image was everything Clara wasn't: petite, delicate-featured, with light hair arranged in perfect ringlets. She held an infant Toby and smiled at the camera with the confidence of someone who knew she was loved. "She was beautiful," Clara observed. "Papa says I have her eyes." Toby traced the glass with one finger. "But I can't see them in the mirror. They just look like eyes to me." "Memory's funny that way," Clara said, sitting on the floor so she was at his height. "Sometimes we see what we remember, not what's really there." Toby set the photograph back precisely where it had been. The other ladies wanted to pack her things away, said it wasn't healthy, keeping shrines. He pronounced the last word carefully, like he'd memorized it. "Papa got real quiet when they said that, scary quiet." "Your father's right to keep what comforts him," Clara said, "though I suspect having her things here hurts him too." "Everything hurts," Toby said matter-of-factly. "That's what Papa told Mr. Henderson when he said we should move to town. Papa said everything hurts the same no matter where you are. So might as well hurt at home." Clara filed this away with all the other pieces she was gathering: a widower who stopped trains, a boy who spoke in bursts of startling wisdom, a house that held its grief like winter holds snow. She found the blanket, a thick wool thing that smelled of lavender sachets, and was closing the chest when Toby spoke again. "You don't try to hug me." Clara paused. "Do you want me to—" He shook his head quickly. "The other ladies always wanted to hug, said I needed comfort." He made a face. "I don't like strangers touching me." "Neither do I," Clara admitted. "In fact, I generally prefer a good handshake to a hug from anyone but family." "We could shake hands," Toby offered seriously. "If you want." Clara extended her hand, and he shook it with gravity beyond his years. His small hand was warm and slightly sticky jam from breakfast, as she suspected. "There," she said, "properly introduced at last." That evening, she found Wyatt in the barn, mending tack by lantern light. The horses shifted in their stalls, making the comfortable sounds of animals settling for the night. "Blanket workout?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." Clara hesitated, then sat on an upturned crate. "Toby showed me the photograph." Wyatt's hand stilled on the leather. "He doesn't usually do that. He's testing me, I think, seeing how I'll react to her memory." Clara picked up a piece of harness, examining it in the lamplight. "He's quite protective of you." "That's my job," Wyatt said quietly. "Protecting him." Children protect their parents too, in their way. He knows you hurt. He's careful not to add to it. Wyatt looked at her then, his face half in shadow. "Most people tell me I should be over it by now. 2 years is long enough. They say, time to move on. Find him a new mother." "Most people are fools," Clara said flatly. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, and Toby doesn't need a new mother. He needs to learn to live with missing the one he had." "Is that what you did learn to live with missing?" The question caught her off guard. "What makes you think I'm missing anything?" "You're here," he said simply. "Teaching a silent boy on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Women like you don't do that unless they're running from something or someone." Clara set down the harness piece. "I told you, My father lost everything. My fiancé decided I wasn't worth the social stigma. That's what happened, Wyatt agreed. Not what you miss. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the horses, the wind, the steady sound of his breathing. I miss believing that being good was enough, she said finally. That if you followed the rules, life would reward you. I miss the girl who thought love was more important than money to the man who said he loved her. He was a fool. Yes, Clara agreed. But so was I, for not seeing it sooner. Wyatt went back to his mending, but she could feel him thinking. Margaret always said I was too trusting. Said I'd believe a horse thief who claimed he was just borrowing. But seems to me it's better than the alternative. Which is never trusting at all. He glanced up at her. Never giving anyone the chance to prove they're worth it. Clara stood, suddenly needing distance from this conversation, from the way the lantern light caught in his eyes. I should check on Toby. Clara. Her name stopped her at the barn door. Thank you for not trying to pack her away. She's not mine to pack, Clara said, and fled before he could respond. That night, winter arrived in earnest. Clara woke to howling wind and snow driving horizontal past her window. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Wyatt already up, banking the fires. Storm's a bad one, he said. Could last days. I need to get the stock secured. What should I do? He looked surprised by the question. Keep the fires going. Keep Toby calm. He doesn't like storms since... He stopped. Just keep him inside. Clara spent the morning teaching Toby his numbers while wind rattled the windows. But as the storm intensified, the boy grew restless, abandoning his slate to pace the kitchen. What's wrong? Clara asked, though she could guess. Mama got sick during a storm, he said, pressing his face to the window. Papa couldn't get to town for the doctor. Your father's just in the barn, Clara reminded him. He'll be back soon. But an hour passed, then two. The storm worsened, snow piling against the windows. Toby's pacing turned frantic. Something's wrong, he insisted. Papa always comes back for lunch. Clara looked out at the wall of white, her own worry rising. The barn was only 50 yards away, but in this storm, it might as well be miles. Get your coat, she decided, and the rope from the pantry. We're not supposed to go out in storms. No, we're not, Clara agreed, already wrapping herself in layers. But sometimes we do things we're not supposed to when people need us. She tied one end of the rope to the porch post, the other around her waist. You hold on to me, she instructed Toby. Don't let go, no matter what. They plunged into the white world. The wind hit like a physical thing, stealing breath, burning skin. Clara couldn't see more than a foot ahead, but she knew the direction, had counted the steps dozens of times in her weeks here. Toby clung to her skirt as they fought through drifts already knee-deep. The barn loomed out of the white like a ship in fog. Clara fumbled for the door, shoved it open. Wyatt! Here! His voice came from the far stall. Duchess is down. They found him kneeling beside the mare, who lay on her side, breathing hard. Think it's colic, he said, not looking away from the horse. If she goes down in this cold... Tell me what to do, Clara said. For the next hour, they worked together, walking the mare in circles when they could get her up, rubbing her sides, keeping her moving. Toby fetched water and blankets without being asked, his earlier panic replaced by determination. Finally. Duchess passed whatever had blocked her system and stood easier, nibbling hay. That was close, Wyatt said, slumping against the stall. He looked at Clara then, really looked at her snow-crusted coat, her red cheeks, her hair coming loose from its pins. You came out in the storm. Toby was worried. I was worried, Toby corrected. Miss Clara was brave. Wyatt stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Yes, he said quietly. She was. They made it back to the house together, the rope guiding them through the white inside. Clara bustled about making coffee while Wyatt built up the fires. Toby sat between them at the table, chattering about the adventure, the fear forgotten in favor of excitement. But Clara caught Wyatt watching her over his coffee cup, something new in his expression. Not the careful distance he'd maintained for weeks, but something warmer, more dangerous. "The other governesses," she said, needing to break the silence. "Would they have come looking?" "No," he said simply. "They wouldn't have." That night, after Toby was asleep, Clara found Margaret's room door open. Wyatt stood by the window, looking out at the storm. "I thought I'd lose another one," he said without turning. "Someone else He stopped, started again. "Toby's all I have left of her." "He's himself too," Clara said from the doorway. "Not just what's left, he's who he's becoming." Wyatt turned then. "You see him? Not the ghost of her, not the tragedy. You see him." "He's easy to see." Clara said, "He's remarkable." "So are you." The words hung between them like the rope that had guided them through the storm, a lifeline and a danger all at once. Clara knew she should leave, should maintain the careful boundaries that kept this arrangement simple. But she stood there in the doorway of a dead woman's room while snow buried the world outside. And for the first time in years, she wanted to step forward instead of back. "Good night, Wyatt," she said instead, and fled to her narrow bed, where she lay awake listening to the storm and wondering when exactly this had stopped being just a job. The first Sunday Clara attended church in Larkspur, she knew exactly what to expect. She'd lived through enough small-town scrutiny to recognize the signs, the pause in conversation when she entered, the quick inventory of her clothes, her height, her unadorned left hand. What she hadn't expected was Toby's fierce grip on her fingers as they walked down the aisle. "They stare," he whispered. "Let them," Clara whispered back. "We have nothing to hide." Wyatt led them to a pew near the middle, not so far back as to seem ashamed, not so far forward as to invite extra attention. But attention came anyway. Clara felt it like heat on her neck, heard it in the rustle of skirts as women leaned together. After the service, they couldn't escape quickly enough. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, descended with the inevitability of winter. "Mr. Langston," she cooed, then turned sharp eyes on Clara. "And you must be the new governess from St. Louis. I heard—" "Yes," Clara said simply, not elaborating. "How unusual to come so far for such a position." The woman's smile could have curdled milk. "One wonders what would drive a woman to leave civilization entirely." "One might wonder many things," Clara replied evenly. "I find wondering is often how gossip starts." "Mrs.?" Henderson's face flushed. "I was merely being neighborly, I'm sure." Clara smiled, showing teeth. "How kind. Good day." She guided Toby toward the door, leaving Mrs. Henderson gaping. Wyatt followed, and she could hear what might have been a cough or a laugh. In the wagon heading home, Toby piped up, "Mrs. Henderson doesn't like you." "No," Clara agreed. "She doesn't. Because you're tall. Because I'm unmarried, living in your father's house. And I don't apologize for either." Clara glanced at Wyatt. "I hope I didn't embarrass you." "You spoke truth," he said, eyes on the road. "Can't be embarrassed by truth." But the encounter had opened the floodgates. Over the next weeks, the good women of Larkspur made their opinions known through friendly visits and Christian concern. "It's not proper." "Mrs." Dalton informed Clara during an unannounced Tuesday visit. "A young woman alone with a widower. What will people think?" "I imagine they'll think whatever they want, regardless of facts," Clara said, not pausing in her bread kneading. "Thinking seems to be what they do best." "There's talk," Mrs. Pritchard warned the following week, having invited herself for tea, "about your background, Someone wrote to St. Louis. You know, the Hartwell family is quite well known. Clara's hand stilled on the teapot. And what did they learn? That you were engaged to the eldest son. That it was broken off after your father's difficulties. All true, Clara said calmly, pouring tea with steady hands. Is there more? Mrs. Pritchard leaned forward. Avid. They say he threw you over. That you pursued him even after... They say many things. Clara set down the pot with a decisive click. Tell me, Mrs. Pritchard, do you have nothing better to do than investigate my past? No sick to tend, no children to raise, no husband to feed. How remarkably idle your life must be. The woman left in a huff, but Clara knew it wouldn't end there. Sure enough, at the general store that Saturday, conversation stopped when she entered. Mr. Henley served her with obvious reluctance, and young Mrs. Curtis actually pulled her skirts aside as Clara passed. Ignore them, Wyatt said that evening, finding her rigid at the kitchen window. They did the same to Margaret when we first married, said I'd married beneath me, that she was just a schoolteacher's daughter looking to better herself. Did it stop? When she proved herself sweeter than honey and twice as proper as any of them. He paused. Though I don't recommend that strategy for you. Despite everything, Clara laughed. No, I don't think I could manage sweet if my life depended on it. Good, Wyatt said quietly. Sweet wasn't what we needed. The worst came the next Sunday. Clara had debated staying home, but Toby wanted to show his friend Samuel his new skill at writing. So they went, heads high, and took their usual pew. Reverend Campbell's sermon was on propriety and the appearance of evil. His eyes found Clara repeatedly as he spoke of temptation, of women who led good men astray, of the importance of reputation in a Christian community. Clara kept her face expressionless, her back straight, but she felt Toby shrinking beside her, felt Wyatt's growing tension. When the sermon finally ended, the silence in the church was deafening. They filed out with the rest, but at the door, Reverend Campbell stopped them. A word. Mr. Langston. Say it. Wyatt's voice was dangerously quiet. Perhaps it would be best if Miss Whitlock found lodgings in town. Mrs. Dalton has a room. Perhaps, Wyatt interrupted. You should worry less about my household and more about the beam in your own eye. Didn't you preach on that last month, or does Scripture only apply when it's convenient? I'm thinking of the boy. No, Toby said suddenly, loudly. You're not thinking of me. Nobody asked me. Nobody ever asks me. His small face was red with fury. Miss Clara is mine. She teaches me and doesn't lie and doesn't smell like dying flowers. You can't have her. He grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward the wagon, leaving Wyatt to follow. The congregation stood frozen, watching a 5-year-old boy defend his governess with more ferocity than they'd seen from him since his mother died. The ride home was silent until Toby spoke from his spot between them. Will you leave now? Do you want me to? Clara asked. No! The word was almost a shout. Then, quieter. Please don't leave. Then I won't, Clara said simply, even though they're mean. People have been mean before. I survived them. I'll survive this too. Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, but didn't move to get down. Clara, he said, and she realized it was the first time he'd used her given name directly. I need to ask you something. She waited. Would it be easier if you found rooms in town I could drive you in for lessons? Or Toby could... Would it be easier for whom? Clara interrupted. For them, certainly. For you, probably. You could avoid their whispers, their judgment. Toby could have friends whose mothers aren't afraid of association with scandal. I don't care about that. Then what are you asking? She turned to face him fully. If you want me to leave, say so. If you think I'm damaging Toby, tell me, but don't dress up their prejudices as concern for my comfort. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Clara shot back. I need respect. I need to earn my wages without apologizing for existing. I need—" She stopped, took a breath. "What I need doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for Toby." "You are," Toby said firmly. "You're what's best." Wyatt looked at his son, then at Clara. Something shifted in his expression. Decision replacing doubt. Then it settled. "You stay." That evening, after Toby was in bed, Clara found herself restless. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, needing air that didn't feel thick with other people's judgment. Wyatt was already there, leaning against the rail, looking out at the stars. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too angry," Clara admitted. "I thought I was past caring what small-minded people think. Apparently not." "They're not all small-minded," Wyatt said. "Just scared. You don't fit their ideas of how things should be. Neither did Margaret, at first, but she had ways of making them comfortable. Smiles and pies and agreeable conversation." "I don't bake well," Clara said dryly, "and my conversation is rarely agreeable." "No," Wyatt agreed. "But you stood up to Mrs. Henderson. You made Mrs. Pritchard leave without finishing her tea. And you got Toby to defend someone besides me for the first time in 2 years. He's a good boy. He's a better boy since you came." Wyatt turned to look at her. "I won't ask you to leave, Clara, not for them, not for anyone. But I need you to know the talk won't stop. It might get worse. They'll make assumptions about us, about why you're here, what happens after dark." "Let them," Clara said. "I've been ruined in their eyes since my engagement ended. At least here. My ruin comes with honest work and a boy who needs me." "Is that all?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara knew what he was asking, knew they were balanced on the edge of something that would change everything if acknowledged. "For now," she said carefully. "That's enough." Wyatt nodded, accepting the boundary. But as they stood there in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, Clara wondered how long "for now" could last. The town would talk regardless. They'd build stories from nothing, spin scandal from innocent proximity. The funny thing was, for all their imagination, they couldn't see the real danger, not in what happened after dark, but in these quiet moments, in the way Wyatt said her name, in how Toby reached for her hand, in the slow, inexorable feeling of becoming necessary to someone again. Inside, a clock chimed midnight. Sunday was over, and Monday would bring its own challenges. But for now, Clara stood on a porch in Wyoming, unashamed and unafraid, with a man who didn't ask her to be smaller or sweeter or anything other than herself. It was, she thought, worth all the gossip in the world. The fever came on a Tuesday night in March, when winter was loosening its grip but hadn't quite let go. Clara had noticed Toby's listlessness at dinner, the way he pushed his food around without eating. By bedtime, his forehead burned under her palm. "Just tired," he mumbled when she asked how he felt. But Clara had taught enough children to know the difference between tired and ill. She settled him in bed with an extra quilt and a promise to check on him later. 2 hours past midnight, his cries woke the house. "Papa," the word was thin, scared. "Papa." Clara reached his room first, still in her nightgown and wrapper. Toby was sitting up, eyes bright with fever, trembling despite the heat radiating from his small body. "I'm here," she said, lighting the lamp. "What's wrong?" "You're not," he blinked, confused. "Where's Mama?" Clara's heart clenched. "I'm Miss Clara. Remember, you're sick, but you're going to be fine." Wyatt appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, fear stark on his face. He crossed to the bed in 2 strides, gathering Toby against him. "How long?" he asked Clara. "The fever started after dinner. It's spiking now." She was already moving, gathering what she needed. "We need to bring it down." For the next hours, they worked in tandem. Clara prepared cool cloths and willow bark tea while Wyatt held his son, murmuring comfort. Toby drifted between sleep and delirium, sometimes calling for his mother, sometimes clutching at Clara's hand like she might disappear. "The last time," Wyatt said quietly while Toby dozed fitfully. "Margaret, it started like this, fever in the night, getting worse despite everything we did." "This isn't last time," Clara said firmly. "Look, his breathing is steady, no rattle in his chest. Children get fevers. Wyatt, it doesn't mean... I can't lose him too." The words were raw, desperate. "I can't..." "You won't." Clara met his eyes. "I won't let you." It was a promise she had no right to make, but she made it anyway. Through the long night, she kept vigil with Wyatt, cooling Toby's fever, coaxing water between his lips, watching for any sign of the crisis passing. Near dawn, Toby woke fully for the first time. His eyes found Clara, focused and aware. "You stayed," he whispered. "Of course I stayed." She smoothed his damp hair back. "Where else would I be?" "The others left when things got hard." "Well," Clara said briskly, wringing out another cool cloth. "I'm not the others, am I?" "No," Toby agreed, then looked at his father. "Papa, you look terrible." Wyatt laughed, a broken sound of relief. "You don't look so good yourself, young man. Will I miss school?" "You are school," Clara reminded him. "We'll continue when you're better. For now, rest is your only lesson." Toby's eyes were already closing again, but his breathing was easier, the fever finally breaking. Clara tucked the quilts around him and stood, suddenly aware of her improper state hair loose, wrapper barely decent, alone with Wyatt in the pre-dawn darkness. "I should," she started, but Wyatt caught her hand. "Thank you," his voice was rough, "for staying, for not being afraid." "I told you," Clara said softly. "I don't scare easily." But she was scared now. She realized, not of fever or gossip or prairie winters, scared of the way Wyatt's hand felt around hers, of the raw gratitude in his eyes, of how natural it felt to stand vigil together over a child they both loved. She pulled away gently. "I'll make coffee. It's nearly morning anyway." "In the kitchen." She tried to steady herself. Her hands shook as she measured grounds, built up the fire. This wasn't what she'd come for. She was supposed to teach letters and numbers, not hold a family together through crisis. She was supposed to maintain professional distance, not make promises in the dark. "Stop thinking so hard," Wyatt said from the doorway. "I can hear it from here." "I wasn't..." "You were." He moved into the kitchen, taking cups from the shelf. "You're thinking about boundaries and propriety and what you should or shouldn't feel." Clara's cheeks heated. "You presume to know my thoughts." "I know mine," Wyatt said simply. "And I know the look of someone trying to talk themselves out of something." "And what am I trying to talk myself out of?" He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "Caring too much, getting too involved, staying when staying gets complicated." "It's already complicated," Clara pointed out. "The whole town thinks..." "I don't give a damn what the town thinks." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "They didn't sit up all night with my boy. They didn't promise to stay when he was scared. They didn't..." He stopped, took a breath. "You did." "Anyone would have..." "No." Wyatt set down his cup, turned to face her fully. "They wouldn't... The first governess left the minute Toby caught a cold, said she couldn't risk her health. The second lasted longer, but made it clear that nursing wasn't in her contract. But you just did what needed doing." "He needed me," Clara said simply. "That's all." "We both did." The words hung between them. Too honest for the early morning hour. Too dangerous for what they implied. Clara looked away first, out the window where dawn was breaking over the mountains. "He'll need careful watching today," she said, returning to safer ground. "Light food when he's ready, plenty of rest." "Clara?" I should dress properly before he wakes again. She moved toward the door, but Wyatt's voice stopped her. You said you wouldn't leave. In the night. When he asked, did you mean it? Clara turned back. In the growing light, she could see the exhaustion on his face, the fear that hadn't quite left his eyes, the hope he was trying not to show. I try not to make promises I can't keep, she said carefully. But yes, I meant it. Relief washed over his features. Good. That's good. Clara escaped to her room, but even as she dressed properly, pinned up her hair, tried to restore proper boundaries, she knew something had shifted in the night. The careful distance she'd maintained had collapsed in the face of a child's fever and a father's fear. Toby recovered quickly, as children do. Within days, he was complaining about staying in bed, begging for his books and slate. Clara resumed lessons in his room, then on the sofa downstairs, finally back at the kitchen table where they belonged. But things were different now. Wyatt's eyes followed her with something new in them. Toby reached for her hand without hesitation, trusting she'd be there. And Clara found herself staying up later, talking with Wyatt by the fire after Toby slept, sharing stories of her childhood, her failed engagement, her fears and hopes. Why teaching? Wyatt asked one evening. With your education, you could have done other things. Such as? Clara raised an eyebrow. Seamstress shop girl companion to some elderly relation teaching was the only respectable option that let me use my mind. You could have married again, found someone who didn't care about money. In St. Louis, Clara shook her head. I was marked goods, the Whitlock girl who couldn't hold on to her man. Too tall, too plain, too sharp-tongued for a proper wife. Richard Hartwell was a fool, Wyatt said quietly. So you've said. It bears repeating. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Though I suppose I should thank him. His loss brought you here. Careful, Clara warned, but her tone was light. That sounds dangerously close to sentiment. Heaven forbid, Wyatt agreed. Next thing you know, I'll be writing poetry. Now that I'd pay to see. They smiled at each other across the hearth, and Clara felt that dangerous warmth spreading through her chest again. This was how it happened. She realized, not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in quiet evenings and shared laughter, in the small intimacies of daily life. I should go, she said, not moving. Should you? It's late. Tomorrow's washing day. Practical, Clara, Wyatt said softly, always thinking of tomorrow's work. Someone has to, she pointed out. If we all sat around mooning at the stars, the washing would never get done. Is that what you think I do, moon at the stars? I think, Clara said carefully, that you're a good man who's been hurt badly and is trying to figure out how to live again. And I think that's brave. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. What about you? Are you trying to figure out how to live again? I thought I had, Clara admitted. I thought I'd made my peace with spinsterhood and other people's children and a life of quiet usefulness. And now? She stood then, needing distance from the conversation, from the way he looked at her. Now I have washing to prepare for. But as she moved past his chair, he caught her hand briefly. Clara, what Toby said about you being he's right. You know, you are. Ours, part of us now, whether you meant to be or not. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then at his face. That's what I'm afraid of, she whispered, and fled before he could respond. In her room, she sat on the edge of her bed and tried to remember why she'd come here, what she'd planned, how she'd meant to keep her heart safe. But all she could think of was Toby's fevered grip on her hand, Wyatt's desperate promise that he couldn't lose his son too, and the terrifying realization that somewhere between that first morning at the station and this quiet spring night, she'd stopped being able to imagine leaving. Tomorrow there would be washing and lessons and all the ordinary tasks that made up a life. But tonight, Clara sat in the dark and admitted what she'd been trying not to know: she was no longer just the governess. She was theirs, as surely as they were becoming hers. The question was what to do about it. The winter fair came to Larkspur on the last Saturday in March, when patches of brown showed through melting snow and the air held promises of spring. Clara hadn't planned to attend crowds, and gossip were not her favorite combination, but Toby had been talking about nothing else for days. "There'll be candy apples," he informed her over breakfast. "And a man who juggles fire. Samuel says his sister saw it last year and nearly fainted." "Samuel says a lot of things," Clara observed, buttering his toast. "Did Samuel also mention the fair costs money?" "Papa has money." Toby looked at his father hopefully. "Don't you, Papa?" Wyatt glanced at Clara over his coffee cup. "Would you like to go?" "The question is whether Toby has earned an outing," Clara said carefully. His arithmetic yesterday was rather creative. "I tried," Toby protested. "Numbers are harder than letters." "Everything's hard until you practice." Clara softened the words with a smile. "But you have been working diligently. Perhaps a few hours at the fair wouldn't hurt." The way Toby's face lit up made her chest tight. He still had shadows under his eyes from the fever 2 weeks past, but his energy had returned full force. "You'll come too?" he asked Clara. "Both of you together?" "If Miss Clara wants to," Wyatt said, something careful in his tone. Clara knew what he was asking. Appearing together at the fair would fan the gossip that had finally started to die down. But Toby was looking at her with such hope, and she found she didn't care what the town thought. "I'll need to change into something warmer," she said, and Toby whooped with joy. An hour later, they climbed down from the wagon at the fairgrounds. The field behind the church was transformed with booths and tents, the air full of wood smoke and cooking meat and early spring mud. Families milled about, children darting between adults' legs, vendors calling their wares. Clara felt the stares immediately. "Mrs." Henderson whispered urgently to Mrs. Dalton. Young Tom Bradley, who worked at the bank, tipped his hat with a knowing smirk. Even Reverend Campbell watched them with disapproval from the church steps. "Ignore them," Wyatt murmured, but Clara had already straightened her spine. "I intend to—" She looked down at Toby, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "Where shall we start?" They wandered through the fair, Toby leading the way. He was fascinated by everything: the knife sharpener with his grinding wheel, the woman selling ribbons and buttons, the pen of piglets that children could pet for a penny. Clara found herself enjoying his enthusiasm more than any of the attractions. "You're good with him," Wyatt said, while Toby was mesmerized by a puppet show. "Natural." "I told you I wasn't good with children," Clara reminded him. "You told me a lot of things." His voice held gentle teasing. "That you were too tall, too plain, too sharp-tongued. Haven't found any of it to be true." "Then you haven't been paying attention." "Oh, I've been paying attention." Something in his tone made her look at him. He was watching her, not the puppet show, with an expression that made her breath catch. "More than I probably should." Before Clara could respond, the puppet show ended, and Toby bounced back to them. "Can we see the fire juggler now, please?" They found the juggler in a cleared space near the center of the fair. A crowd had gathered, and Clara was conscious of how close Wyatt stood as they pressed forward for Toby to see. She could smell his soap and leather scent, feel the solid warmth of him at her shoulder. The juggler was skilled, tossing flaming torches in increasingly complex patterns. The crowd gasped and applauded. Toby watched with his mouth open, completely entranced. Clara found herself watching Wyatt and Toby more than the performance: the way Wyatt's hand rested protective on his son's shoulder, how Toby unconsciously leaned back against his father's legs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the juggler called as his act concluded. "The winter fair wouldn't be complete without dancing. The musicians are tuning up in the main tent. Don't let the cold keep you from warming your hearts." The crowd began moving toward a large canvas tent erected at the far end of the field. Toby tugged at Wyatt's hand. Can we watch the dancing? Watch, yes, Wyatt agreed. But then we should head home. It's getting late. Inside the tent, lanterns cast warm light over a wooden floor laid for dancing. A small band fiddle, guitar, and accordion was indeed tuning up. Families found spots along the edges while young couples whispered and giggled, waiting for the music to start. Clara was unprepared for the wave of memory that hit her. How many dances had she attended in St. Louis? How many times had she stood at the edges, too tall for most partners, watching others whirl by, even with Richard? Dancing had been awkward. He'd been shorter than her in heels and had compensated by holding her at arm's length, like her height was contagious. "You're thinking too hard again," Wyatt said quietly. "It's nothing, just remembering." The band struck up a lively reel, and couples flooded the floor. Toby watched, fascinated, as skirts swirled and boots stomped in rhythm. Clara saw him trying to memorize the steps, his little feet moving slightly with the beat. Then the music changed to a slower waltz, and something shifted in the tent. This was a dance for sweethearts, for married couples, for those who didn't need to maintain proper distance. Several couples left the floor, but others moved closer, lost in each other and the music. "Clara Jean Whitlock," Wyatt said suddenly, formally, "would you dance with me?" Clara turned to stare at him. "Here now, Wyatt, the whole town is watching." "Let them watch." He held out his hand. "I'm tired of caring what they think, tired of letting their judgment dictate our lives. Dance with me." "I don't—" Clara glanced around, saw the avid faces waiting for her response. "I'm not a good dancer. I'm too tall. I'll step on your feet." "I'll risk it." "Papa," Toby said urgently, "you should dance with Miss Clara. Mama always said dancing made everything better." That decided her. Clara placed her hand in Wyatt's and let him lead her onto the floor. She was aware of the sudden hush, the renewed whispers. But then Wyatt's arm came around her waist and the world narrowed to just them. "I really am too tall," she murmured as they began to move. "You're perfect," he said simply, and her heart stuttered. He was a better dancer than she'd expected, confident and steady. He didn't hold her at arm's length or apologize for her height. He just guided her through the waltz like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they'd been dancing together for years instead of minutes. "People are staring," Clara said. "Are they? I hadn't noticed." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I'm too busy looking at you." "Wyatt, you know what I see," he continued softly. "A woman who stood up to the biggest gossips in town without flinching, who taught my son to write his name and believe in himself again, who sat up all night with a sick child and never complained, who makes our house feel like home for the first time in 2 years." "Stop," Clara whispered. "Please." "Why? Because it's not proper, because the town might talk." He spun her gently, and she followed without thinking. "They're already talking, Clara. Have been since the day you arrived. The only question is whether we let them matter." The music was ending. Clara knew she should step away, return to the edges where she belonged, but Wyatt was looking at her like she was something precious, and she found she couldn't move. "Papa, Miss Clara?" Toby's voice broke the spell. "You danced. You really danced." Clara did step back then, acutely aware of their audience. Sure enough, half the town seemed to be watching, expressions ranging from scandalized to speculative. Mrs. Henderson looked ready to faint. Reverend Campbell's frown could have curdled milk. "We should go," Clara said quietly. Wyatt nodded, but as they collected Toby and headed for the exit, he placed his hand at the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive. Clara knew she should object, should maintain the distance that kept things simple, but she was tired of simple, tired of safe, tired of apologizing for taking up space in the world. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Toby chattered happily about everything he'd seen as they walked to the wagon, but Clara was aware of Wyatt's silence, of the way he helped her up with hands that lingered a moment too long. The ride home was quiet, Toby drowsing between them as stars began to appear. Clara watched the familiar landmarks past the stand of cottonwoods, the creek crossing, the rise that showed the ranch house windows glowing with lamplight. Home, her traitorous heart whispered. "Thank you," she said as Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. "For the dance. I'd forgotten what it felt like to..." To what? To not feel too much of anything, too tall, too plain, too inappropriate for the setting. She met his eyes in the dim light. "You made me feel like I fit, like I belonged. That's dangerous." "Why dangerous?" "Because I might start believing it." She turned toward the house, but his voice stopped her. "Would that be so bad, believing you belong here with us?" Clara closed her eyes. "Ask me again when spring term ends, when my contract is finished and I have to decide whether to stay or go." "I'm asking now." She turned back to find him standing very close, Toby sleeping in his arms but his eyes intense on hers. "Because I need to know. Clara, are you counting days until you can leave, or are you starting to think of this as home?" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that you're a good man asking questions I'm not ready to answer. And I think we should get Toby inside before he catches cold." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but Clara, those questions aren't going away. And neither am I." Later, after Toby was tucked in and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Clara stood at her window looking out at the stars. She could still feel Wyatt's hand at her waist, still hear the music, still see the look in his eyes when he'd said she was perfect. Tomorrow the town would talk. The gossip would be worse than ever. She'd danced with the widower, in public, looking entirely too comfortable in his arms. They'd say she was a shameless opportunist. They'd say poor Margaret was barely cold in her grave. They'd say Wyatt was thinking with something other than his brain. But tonight, Clara allowed herself to remember the feeling of fitting perfectly in someone's arms, of being seen and valued not despite her sharp edges but because of them. She thought of Toby's joy at seeing them dance, of Wyatt's steady presence, of a house that was beginning to feel like home. Spring term would end in 6 weeks. She'd promised herself she'd decide, then stay or go, risk or run, but standing there in the darkness, still feeling the phantom warmth of Wyatt's hand in hers. Clara suspected the decision had already been made. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early April, when Clara was teaching Toby about the different types of clouds. They were sitting on the porch, taking advantage of the warming weather, when she saw a rider approaching from town. "Company," Toby observed, shading his eyes. "That's Mr. Patterson from the postal office." Clara's stomach tightened. In her experience, unexpected letters rarely brought good news. She stood, smoothing her skirts, as the postmaster dismounted. "Miss Whitlock," he said, touching his hat. "Letter came for you on yesterday's train. Figured it might be important, coming all the way from St. Louis." He handed her the envelope, thick paper with familiar handwriting. Clara's hands remained steady, but her pulse quickened. "Thank you for bringing it out, Mr. Patterson." "No trouble." But he lingered, clearly curious. "Hope it's not bad news." "I'm sure it's nothing urgent," Clara said pleasantly, not moving to open it. "Would you like some water for your horse?" He took the hint and declined, mounting up with obvious reluctance. Clara waited until he was well down the road before looking at the letter again. Richard Hartwell's handwriting hadn't improved in the years since their separation. "Who's it from?" Toby asked. "Someone I used to know." Clara tucked the letter into her pocket. "Now, where were we? Yes, cumulus clouds." But her mind wasn't on the lesson. All afternoon, she felt the letter's weight in her pocket, its presence like a stone. She managed to get through Toby's studies, help with the evening chores, prepare dinner, but Wyatt noticed her distraction. Everything all right? He asked as she nearly put salt in the coffee. Fine, Clara said quickly. Just wool gathering. After dinner, she excused herself early, claiming a headache. In her room, by lamplight, she finally opened the letter. Asterisk, my dearest Clara. Asterisk, I hope this letter finds you well, though I confess I was shocked to learn of your current situation. A governess in Wyoming. When Mother told me, I could scarcely believe it. Asterisk, I write with news that I hope will bring you joy. My circumstances have changed considerably since our unfortunate parting. My uncle in Philadelphia has left me his entire estate, making me independently wealthy. I am no longer beholden to my mother's opinions or society's strictures. Asterisk, Clara, I was a fool. I see that now. I let convention and cowardice cost me the one woman who truly understood me. I have thought of you every day these 3 years, wondering if you could forgive me, if we might begin again. Asterisk, I am coming to Larkspur. By the time you receive this, I will already be traveling. I intend to win you back, to offer you the life you deserve not as a governess in some frontier town, but as my wife, with all the comfort and respect that position entails. Asterisk, I know I have no right to your forgiveness, but I pray you will grant me the chance to earn it. We were meant to be together. Clara, surely you must feel it too. Asterisk, yours, eternally. Asterisk, Richard, asterisk. Clara read the letter twice, then sat staring at nothing. Richard was coming here. The man who had broken her heart, destroyed her faith in love. Left her to face society's scorn alone, he was coming to claim her like she was a package left in storage. A knock at her door made her jump. Clara, Wyatt's voice, concerned. Toby said you were unwell. I'm fine, she called, but her voice shook. You don't sound fine. A pause. May I come in? It wasn't proper. But then, when had they worried about proper yes? He opened the door but didn't enter. Just stood in the doorway, taking in her pale face. The letter crumpled in her hands. Bad news. I don't know. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. My former fiancé writes that he's coming to fetch me. Apparently, he's decided 3 years later that abandoning me was a mistake. Wyatt went very still. Fetch you. Like a forgotten trunk. Clara smoothed the letter. Read parts aloud in a mocking tone. Win me back, the life I deserve. As if I've been in storage, waiting for him to remember I exist. What will you tell him? Clara looked up, surprised by the careful neutrality in Wyatt's voice. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. I don't know, she admitted. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear these words. I loved him, or thought I did, planned my whole life around becoming Mrs. Richard Hartwell. And now I teach a 5-year-old his letters and help with the washing and argue with you about whether coffee is strong enough. Her voice softened. Now I have a life, not just plans for one. He's offering you comfort, respectability, everything I can't. Wyatt stopped, jaw tight. Is that what you think I want, comfort? Clara stood, anger flaring. Do you know me so little? I know you deserve better than managing a ranch house and raising another woman's child. The words hung between them like a blade. Clara felt them cut deep, deeper than Richard's abandonment ever had. Is that how you see it? She asked quietly. Managing raising another woman's child, is that all I am here? Clara, no, I didn't mean... I think you did. She moved past him to the door. I think you've decided what I deserve without asking what I want. Just like Richard did. Just like everyone does. She paused in the doorway. For your information, Mr. Langston, I've never felt like I was raising another woman's child. I felt like I was helping raise Toby. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it. She left him standing there and went to the kitchen. Needing to do something with her hands, she found herself making bread. kneading dough with perhaps more force than necessary. That's where Toby found her an hour later, creeping down in his nightshirt. "I heard voices," he said. "Are you angry?" "Not at you, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out before she could stop it. "At Papa?" Clara sighed, covered the dough to rise. "Sit down. I have something to tell you." She explained simply a man she'd known before was coming to visit, someone who'd wanted to marry her once. Toby listened with the intense focus he brought to his lessons. "Do you want to marry him now?" he asked when she finished. "I don't think so. But he hurt you before. Why would he come back?" "Sometimes people realize they made mistakes." Clara chose her words carefully. "Sometimes they try to fix them. Like when I broke Mama's vase and tried to glue it back." Toby's face was serious. "Papa said even if you fix something, you can still see the cracks. Your father's a wise man." When he wasn't being an idiot, she added silently. "Will you leave with the man?" Clara looked at Toby's anxious face, saw the fear he was trying to hide. "What would you want me to do?" "Stay," he said immediately. "Forever. But Papa says we can't make people stay just because we want them to. They have to want it too." "And what makes you think I don't want to stay?" Toby shrugged. "You're sad sometimes. When you think no one's looking, like you miss something." Out of the mouths of babes. "I do miss things sometimes. My old life, my family, but that doesn't mean I want to go back. Like how I miss Mama but don't want to go to heaven yet." Clara's throat tightened. Exactly like that. Toby slipped off his chair and came to stand beside her. "If the man tries to take you, I'll stop him. I'll tell him you're ours now." "Oh, Toby!" She pulled him into a hug. "Propriety be damned. No one can take me anywhere I don't want to go. I promise." The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Wyatt apologized the morning after their argument, stumbling over words. "I spoke poorly." He said, "You're not what I said. You're not just anything. You're everything. To us. To me." Pretty words. Clara replied coolly, "But you showed what you really think, that I'm settling for less than I deserve by being here." "That's not, isn't it?" She met his eyes. "You think Richard can offer me something better. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should hear what he has to say." The hurt that flashed across Wyatt's face gave her savage satisfaction, followed immediately by guilt, but she didn't take the words back. Richard arrived on Thursday's Eastbound stage. Clara watched from the window as he stepped down still handsome in that polished way. Though his hair was thinner, his middle thicker, he wore a city suit that looked absurd on Larkspur's muddy Main Street. "Is that him?" Toby asked, peering around her. "Yes. He looks soft," Toby pronounced with 5-year-old disdain. "Like he's never brushed a horse." "Despite everything," Clara smiled. "Not everyone brushes horses, Toby." "Everyone should." She'd sent word to the boarding house that she could meet Richard in town that afternoon. No point in him coming to the ranch, stirring up more gossip. She dressed carefully, not her best dress, but not her worst either. She wanted to look like what she was, a woman who worked for her living and wasn't ashamed of it. "You don't have to go," Wyatt said as she prepared to leave. "Yes, I do." She pulled on her gloves. "I need to close this chapter properly, not for him, for me." The meeting was at the hotel restaurant, neutral ground. Richard stood when she entered, and she saw his shock at her appearance. 3 years of Wyoming sun and hard work had changed her. She was thinner, but stronger, her hands rougher, her skin touched by weather, not the pale St. Louis belle he'd courted. "Clara." He took her hands, or tried to. She kept them folded at her waist. "You look different." "I am different." She sat, waited for him to do the same. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Straight to business, no pleasantries." He smiled the smile that used to make her melt. "Very well. Clara, I've come to make things right. I was young, foolish, too concerned with what others thought, but I've grown, changed. And I want you back. Why? The simple question seemed to perplex him. Because we were meant to be together. Everyone said so. We were the perfect match before your father's difficulties. Perfect, Clara repeated. Tell me, Richard, what made us perfect? Well, our families knew each other, similar education, similar values. You were accomplished, beautiful in your way. In my way, he flushed. You know what I mean. Striking rather than conventionally pretty. But that doesn't matter now. With my inheritance, we can go anywhere. Europe. Perhaps no one would know about your past circumstances. My past circumstances. Clara leaned back, studying him. You mean my father's bankruptcy or my years as a governess, which embarrasses you more? Clara, you're twisting my words. I'm offering you everything. Marriage, wealth, position. Surely that's worth more than whatever you have here. What I have here, Clara said slowly, is honest work. A boy who needs me, a man who sees me, all of me, not just the parts that fit his idea of perfect. I have a home where I'm valued for what I contribute, not tolerated despite my circumstances. You're talking about that rancher. Richard's voice turned ugly. The whole town speaks of it. How you live in his house, care for his child. Do you know what they call you? I imagine they call me many things. The difference is, I no longer care. You should care. Your reputation. My reputation was destroyed the day you walked away. Clara stood. But I built a new life without it. Without you. And I find I prefer it. You can't mean that. Choose a hard life on a ranch over what I'm offering. Yes, Clara said simply. I do. Richard stood too, anger modeling his face. You're making a mistake. When he tires of you, when you're old and worn from labor, remember I offered you better. I'll remember. Clara agreed. I'll remember that you came back not because you loved me, but because your circumstances changed. I'll remember that you still see me as something to be embarrassed about, to hide away in Europe, and I'll be grateful every day that I said no. She left him there and walked back to the ranch, her steps light despite the long distance. She'd faced her past and found it smaller than her present. Richard's offer of comfort and wealth seemed pale beside Toby's laughter and Wyatt's steady presence. When she arrived home, they were waiting on the porch, Wyatt tense, Toby anxious. Well, Wyatt asked. I told him no. Clara climbed the steps, suddenly exhausted. I told him I had a life here. Do you, Wyatt's voice was careful, have a life here? Clara looked at him, this complicated man who frustrated and challenged her, who saw her truly. Then at Toby, who watched with eyes too knowing for his years. Yes, she said, I do, if you'll have me. Toby launched himself at her, all sharp elbows and fierce joy. Over his head, Clara met Wyatt's eyes. There would be more to say, conversations to have, futures to discuss. But for now, this was enough, being chosen and choosing in return, building something new from the ashes of what was lost. Richard left on the next morning's westbound stage. Clara didn't watch him go. She was too busy teaching Toby about the different types of clouds, all of which, she noted with satisfaction, were moving east, away from Wyoming, away from the life she'd claimed as her own. The day after Richard's departure, Clara threw herself into spring cleaning with a vengeance that had Toby hiding in the barn and Wyatt treading carefully around her determined energy. She attacked winter's accumulated dust like it had personally offended her, scrubbing floors, beating rugs, washing windows until they gleamed. She's scary when she cleans, Toby whispered to his father as they watched Clara haul mattresses outside to air in the sun. She's thinking, Wyatt replied, recognizing the signs. Best to let her work through it. By afternoon, Clara had moved upstairs. She cleaned the unused rooms first, then her own, and finally stood before the closed door of Margaret's room. She hadn't been inside since that night of Toby's fever, when she'd first understood what it meant to be needed. The door opened easily. Sunlight streamed through windows hazed with dust, illuminating the preserved space. Everything remained as Margaret had left it, the silver brush set, the photograph, the carefully made bed. Clara stood there for a long moment, then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with the windows, letting in fresh air that stirred the stale atmosphere. The bedding came next, carried outside to hang in the spring breeze. She cleaned carefully, respectfully, but thoroughly. This was a room in a living house, not a shrine to the dead. That's how Wyatt found her, kneeling beside a trunk at the foot of the bed, surrounded by carefully folded linens. "Clara!" His voice was shocked. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning." She didn't look up. These quilts need airing if they're to last. "That's not... No one's touched her things since she died." Clara sat back on her heels, finally meeting his eyes. 2 years. Wyatt, 2 years of dust and memory. She wouldn't want this. You don't know what she'd want. The words came out harsh, defensive. "No," Clara agreed. "But I know what Toby needs, what you need. And it's not a museum to grief. I never asked you to what care to see how you both tiptoe around this room like it might break." Clara stood, a leather-bound journal in her hands. "I found this, her diary. I think... Have you read it?" Wyatt's face went white. "No, I couldn't." "May I?" He stared at her. This woman who'd blown into their lives like a March wind, rearranging everything. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to understand. You loved her. Toby loved her. She must have been remarkable. But I only know her through her absence, through the hole she left." Clara held the journal carefully. "I'd like to know her through her own words." Wyatt was quiet for so long Clara thought he'd refuse. Then, "Read it, but not here, not alone." That evening, after Toby was in bed, they sat by the fire, Wyatt in his chair, Clara on the settee, Margaret's journal between them like a bridge. Clara opened it to a random page and began to read aloud. Asterisk. April 15th, 1872. Wyatt brought me wildflowers today, clutched in his big hands like he was afraid he'd crush them. He does that, treats delicate things with such care, as if his strength might damage them. I wanted to tell him I'm not as fragile as he thinks, but I like the way he looks at me, like I'm something precious. Asterisk. Clara's voice caught. She glanced at Wyatt, saw his eyes closed, face tight with memory. "Should I stop?" "No." He opened his eyes. "Continue." She read more entries, Margaret's joy at discovering she was expecting, her fears about motherhood, her delight in small things. The woman who emerged from the pages was warm, optimistic, deeply in love with her life. Asterisk. December 3rd, 1872. Toby said "Mama" today. Wyatt cried. I pretended not to notice, but seeing this strong man undone by a baby's first word, I fall in love with him all over again each day. Asterisk. "She sounds wonderful," Clara said softly. She was. Wyatt stared into the fire. Sweet, gentle, everything good in the world. When she died, I thought goodness died with her. Clara closed the journal. "Did it?" He looked at her then, really looked. "No, it just looks different now. Less sweet, maybe, more honest, but still good." "Wyatt." "I need to say something." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When your Richard came, when he offered you all that comfort and wealth, I thought you'd go. Part of me even thought you should go, that you deserved better than what we could give you. And now I think maybe we deserve you. Maybe Toby and I have grieved long enough, been alone long enough. Maybe it's time to let someone in who doesn't try to be her, who's wholly themselves." Clara's heart was beating too fast. "What are you saying?" I'm saying I found something while you were cleaning. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope. It was in her jewelry box. A letter. For me. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and read, My dearest Wyatt, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm gone. I pray you never need these words, but I know you'll blame yourself. Hold on to grief like it's all you have left of me. So let me tell you what I need you to know. Be happy. Find love again. Give Toby a mother who'll challenge him, who'll make him strong. Don't shrine my memory, my love. Let someone else use my good dishes, tend my garden, fill this house with life again. The only way you can fail me is by stopping your life because mine ended. All my love. Forever. Margaret. Asterisk. Wyatt's voice broke on the last words. Clara found herself on her feet, moving to him without conscious thought. She knelt beside his chair, took his shaking hands in hers. She was wise, Clara whispered. Kind, thinking of you even then. I didn't want to read it. Was afraid she'd tell me to keep mourning, to never... He stopped, squeezed her hands. Clara, I need to tell you something else. That advertisement I placed for a governess. It wasn't the first. It was the 5th. But I wrote it differently. I wrote it thinking about what kind of woman I wanted to find. Someone practical. Someone strong. Someone who'd see Toby for himself. Not as a project or a replacement child. Wyatt, I wrote it for you. Without knowing you existed. I wrote it hoping someone like you would answer. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. And then you did. You stepped off that train. Too tall and too proud and too perfect. And I knew I was in trouble. Is that why you stopped the train, really? I stopped it because I couldn't let you leave without trying. Without seeing if what I'd felt in your letters was real. He freed one hand, touched her face gently. It is. I'm not her. Clara felt compelled to say, I'll never be sweet or gentle or... I don't want you to be her. I want you to be you. The woman who argues about coffee strength and faces down gossips and teaches my son to be brave. His hand cupped her cheek. The woman who cleaned Margaret's room not to erase her, but to make space for life again. Clara turned her face into his palm, closed her eyes. I'm scared. I've been left before. I've built walls to protect myself. I know, but maybe it's time to stop protecting and start living. She opened her eyes, found his face inches from hers. Maybe it is. He kissed her then, there on the floor beside his chair, with Margaret's blessing between them and her journal nearby. It was nothing like the careful, proper kisses Richard had given her in St. Louis parlors. This was real and deep and full of promise, tasting of coffee and possibility. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. Stay. Not as the governess, not for Toby, though he needs you. Stay for me, with me, as my wife. That's not a proper proposal, Clara said. But she was smiling through tears she hadn't known were falling. Nothing about us has been proper. He pulled back to look at her. Clara Jean Whitlock, you've turned our lives upside down, challenged everything I thought I knew, made me want things I thought I'd never want again. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? You already deserve me. Clara said, the question is whether I'm brave enough to believe I deserve this happiness. Are you? She thought of Richard's offer safe, comfortable, empty, then of this complicated, challenging, full, yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her again, and this time she felt the walls she'd built crumbling, letting in light and air and love. When they finally parted, Wyatt pulled her to her feet. We should tell Toby in the morning, he said, though I suspect he already knows. He asked me yesterday if he should start calling you Mama. What did you tell him? I told him to ask you. Clara smiled, thinking of the boy who'd claimed her as his own at church, who'd defended her fierce as a wolf pup. I'd be honored to be his mama. In all ways, not just name. They stood together in the firelight. In the house where grief had lived so long it had worn grooves in the floorboards. But now something else was taking root, not replacing what was lost, but growing alongside it. Different, but equally strong. "I should go," Clara said eventually, though she didn't move. "Propriety and all." "Propriety," Wyatt agreed, not letting go of her hands. "Though after we're married, I'll still insist on proper coffee strength and you'll still disagree." "I look forward to a lifetime of that argument." Clara laughed, pulled free gently. "Good night, Wyatt." "Good night, future Mrs. Langston." She paused at the stairs. "I found something else today, in the trunk, Margaret's wedding dress. It's beautiful." "She'd want you to wear it," Wyatt said with certainty. "She'd want all of this, the happiness, the moving forward, the life continuing." Clara nodded and climbed the stairs to her room, soon to be just a guest room again. Through her window, she could see stars wheeling overhead, the same stars that had watched her arrive months ago, uncertain and defensive. Tomorrow she'd wake in this same room, but everything would be different. Tomorrow she'd tell Toby he could call her mama if he wished. Tomorrow she'd face the town's gossip with a ring on her finger and joy in her heart. But tonight, she held Margaret's journal and whispered a thank you to the woman who'd loved these men first and loved them well enough to let them go, who'd known that love wasn't diminished by sharing but multiplied by growing. Clara had come west looking for work and independence. She'd found those things, but she'd also found something she hadn't dared hope for: a home, a family, a love that saw her clearly and chose her anyway. It was, she thought as sleep finally came, worth stopping a train for. The evening settled around them like a well-worn blanket. Clara sat by the dying fire, Margaret's journal in her lap, while Wyatt stood by the window watching the last light fade from the sky. Neither had moved to light the lamps, content in the gentle darkness that made truth-telling easier. "There's something else," Wyatt said finally, his back still to her. "Something I should have told you sooner." Clara waited, recognizing the weight in his voice. "The night Margaret died, she asked me to promise something." He turned, his face half in shadow. "Asked me to remarry within 3 years. Said Toby needed a mother, that I needed someone. I refused." "Why?" "Because I was angry. At her for leaving, at God for taking her, at myself for not saving her." He moved to his chair, sat heavily. "I told her I'd never love anyone else. She smiled, even dying. She smiled and said love wasn't the point. Stability was security for Toby." "But you placed the advertisement," Clara pointed out. "You looked for someone." "For Toby. Only for Toby. Or so I told myself." His laugh was bitter. "Then you wrote back. Your letter was so practical, no false sympathy, no attempts to charm. Just straightforward qualifications and honest questions about the position. I read it 3 times. It was a business arrangement," Clara said softly. "That's all I expected." "Was it?" Wyatt leaned forward. "Because your second letter, when you asked about Toby's interests, what made him laugh? No one else asked that. They asked about salary, about time off, about the accommodations. You asked about him." Clara remembered writing that letter, how she'd hesitated over the personal questions, worried they were overstepping. Children aren't positions to be filled. They're people. I wanted to know who he was. And that's when I started hoping. Wyatt's voice dropped. Hoping maybe Margaret was right. Maybe there was someone who could see us not as a tragedy to be fixed, but as a family to join. "Wyatt, I need you to understand something." He met her eyes. "I didn't stop that train because I suddenly realized I loved you. I stopped it because I couldn't let you go without knowing if you could be what Toby needed, the love. That came later, snuck up on me like spring after a hard winter." "When?" Clara found herself asking. "When did you know?" "The storm, when you came looking for us. His smile was rueful. You tied that rope around your waist and walked into a blizzard because Toby was worried. Not because it was your job, not because you had to, because he needed you, because we needed you. I was terrified, Clara admitted. Not of the storm, of how much I wanted to find you safe, of how much it already mattered. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling its last protests against the dying light. Finally, Wyatt spoke again. I wrote another letter, after that night, never sent it. To whom? To you. He stood, went to the desk in the corner, pulled out a folded paper. I've been carrying it, trying to find the right time, but there's never a right time for changing everything, is there? He handed her the letter. Clara unfolded it with careful fingers, tilted it toward the faint firelight to read. Asterisk, Dear Clara. I'm not a man of words, you know this, but some things need saying, even if I say them poorly. Asterisk, you asked once why I really placed that advertisement. The truth is, I was trying to fulfill a promise without keeping it, find someone for Toby while keeping my heart locked away. Safe, dead as Margaret. Asterisk, then you arrived. Too tall, you said too plain, too sharp-tongued. I saw none of that. I saw a woman who looked at my broken family and didn't try to fix us, who didn't want to replace what we'd lost, but to help us grow around the loss. I'm writing this at 3 a.m, after you risked everything to find us in the storm. Toby is sleeping, finally warm and safe. You're in your room, probably awake too, thinking too hard about something, and I'm here, trying to find words for what I'm feeling. Asterisk, hope. That's the word. You make me hope. Asterisk, I don't know what I'm hoping for. That you'll stay past spring term. That you'll keep making terrible coffee and arguing with me about it. That someday I'll find the courage to tell you that when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you use for town, the whole room gets brighter. I'm not asking for anything. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I needed to write this down. Proof that I'm coming back to life. That watching you with Toby, seeing you in our home, hearing your laugh, it's thawing parts of me I thought were frozen forever. Asterisk. Thank you for answering an advertisement, for stepping off that train, for being yourself, complete and complicated and perfect. Asterisk, yours if you'll have me. Asterisk, asterisk, Wyatt, asterisk. Clara's vision blurred. She looked up to find Wyatt watching her, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. You never sent it, she said. I was afraid you'd leave, afraid you'd stay out of pity, afraid of wanting something again. He knelt beside her chair, taking the letter from her trembling hands. But I'm more afraid of never trying, of letting you wonder if this is real or just convenience. I know it's real. Clara touched his face. I've known since you told Mrs. Henderson that truth couldn't embarrass you, since you defended my right to be here, as myself. That's not... Wyatt caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. Clara, I need to be clear. This isn't about Toby needing a mother or me needing help with the house. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you, because the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I'm drowning, because you've become essential to my breathing. Oh, the word came out small, overwhelmed. Is it too much too fast? No. Clara slipped from the chair to kneel with him on the worn rug. It's just that no one's ever... Richard said he loved me, but he meant he loved what I represented. The right family, the right connections. You're the first person to love me for exactly who I am. Then he was a fool. Wyatt's hands framed her face. You're magnificent. Clara Jean, your strength, your honesty, the way you challenge everything, including me, especially me. You've made us a family again, not by replacing what we lost, but by being wholly yourself. I love you too, Clara whispered. Both of you. I came here looking for work and found home, looking for independence and found belonging. I don't know how it happened. Does it matter how... No, she decided. It doesn't. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, a promise and a claiming all at once. When they parted, Clara laughed shakily. We should plan things. The wedding. How to tell Toby, what the town will say. The town will say what they always say. Wyatt said, that I'm too lucky and you're too good for me. They'll be right. They'll say I trapped you, that I planned this all along. Let them. We know the truth. He helped her to her feet, keeping her hands in his. As for Toby, he asked me last week if he could call you Mama after the wedding. I think he's been planning this longer than either of us. Smart boy. Gets it from his teacher. They stood facing each other, hands linked, hearts finally open. The fire had died to embers, but neither moved to add wood. This moment felt too precious to interrupt with practical concerns. When? Clara asked finally. The wedding. Tomorrow, if I could. Wyatt's grin was boyish. But I suppose you'll want something proper. Time to make a dress. Invite people. I don't need proper. I never have. Clara squeezed his hands. But I would like to do this right. For Toby. For the town that's going to have to accept us, whether they like it or not. June, Wyatt suggested. That gives us 2 months. Enough time for banns. For you to write to anyone back east you'd want to know. There's no one. The realization didn't hurt as it once might have. Everyone who matters to me is here. Then June it is. He lifted their joined hands, kissed her knuckles. Mrs. Langston, Clara Langston, it suits you. Better than Miss Whitlock, the spinster governess. You were never just a spinster governess. Not from the moment you stepped off that train ready to take on the world. Clara thought of that morning. Was it really only 3 months ago? She'd been so certain of her plans, so determined to maintain her independence. Now, here she stood, promised to a widower with a child, ready to bind her life to theirs. I should go to bed, she said, though she made no move to leave. Tomorrow will come early. It always does. But Wyatt didn't release her hands either. Clara, thank you. For what? For saying yes. For seeing past my grief to who I could be again. For loving Toby like your own. For being brave enough to stay. I'm not brave. Clara protested. I'm terrified. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't be the mother Toby needs? What if... What if you're exactly who we need? Wyatt interrupted. What if perfect isn't about being sweet and gentle, but about being real and present and fierce in your love? Fierce, Clara repeated, tasting the word. I can do fierce. I know. His smile was soft. It's one of the things I love most about you. Finally, reluctantly, they parted. Clara gathered Margaret's journal, holding it carefully. I'll finish reading this, she said. I want to know her better, to honor what she built here. She'd like that. She'd like you. Wyatt walked her to the stairs. Good night, my love. The endearment made her breath catch. Good night. She climbed the stairs to her room, heart full of plans and promises. June seemed very far away and entirely too close. There was so much to do, so much to decide. But not tonight. Tonight, she would read Margaret's words, understanding now that she wasn't replacing this woman, but continuing her work, loving these men, building this family, creating a life from loss and hope in equal measure. Through her window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by human joy or sorrow. But Clara felt the world shifting beneath her feet, reshaping itself around this new truth she was loved. She was chosen. She was home. Tomorrow, she would tell Toby. Tomorrow, she would face the town. Tomorrow, she would begin planning a future she'd never dared imagine. But tonight, she held the proof of Wyatt's love, a letter never sent but kept close. Words written in darkness that promised light. Tonight, she was Clara Jean Whitlock, governess and teacher and woman enough to know her own worth. Come June, she would be Clara Langston, wife and mother and partner in this life they were building together. The transformation didn't frighten her anymore. She'd already changed, already become who she was meant to be. The rest was just paperwork and promises, both of which she intended to handle with the same fierce practicality that had brought her here in the first place. Dawn came gentle to the valley, painting the eastern mountains in shades of rose and gold. Clara stood at the kitchen window, both hands wrapped around her coffee cup, watching the light creep across the land she'd come to love. Behind her, she heard Wyatt's familiar tread on the stairs, the creak of the third step he always promised to fix. "You're up early," he said, moving to stand beside her. "Couldn't sleep." She leaned into his warmth. "Too much thinking. About how different this morning feels from the one when I arrived." Clara turned to face him. That woman who stepped off the train, she was so certain she knew what she wanted. Independence, solitude, safety from disappointment. And now I know those things are cold comfort compared to this. She set down her cup, touched his face. Compared to you and Toby, compared to belonging. Wyatt caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "The preacher will be here at 10, unless you've changed your mind." "Never." The word came swift and sure. "Though I do wonder if we should have waited, had a proper wedding in the church. You want to walk down that aisle with the whole town watching Mrs. Henderson in the front row, clutching her pearls." Clara laughed. "When you put it that way, a home wedding sounds perfect." "Papa, Miss Clara." Toby's voice came from the doorway. He stood in his nightshirt, hair sticking up at odd angles, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is today the day?" "It is," Wyatt confirmed. "If that's still all right with you." Toby padded over, wedged himself between them at the window. "Samuel says when people get married, everything changes. He says his papa stopped laughing when he married Samuel's stepmother." Clara knelt to Toby's level. "What do you think will change?" The boy considered. "You'll move into Papa's room. I can call you Mama without asking first. We'll be a real family, not just pretending." "We're already a real family," Clara said firmly. "The wedding just makes it official for everyone else. But for us, we've been family since the day you showed me where the bowls were kept." "Really?" "Really." She smoothed his wild hair. "Though there is one thing that will change. My name. I'll be Clara Langston instead of Clara Whitlock." "Clara Langston," Toby repeated, testing the sound. Then his face brightened. "That means you'll be mine forever. Same name means same family, that's what Samuel says." "Samuel says a lot of things," Wyatt observed dryly. "But this time he's right." They spent the morning in quiet preparation. Clara wore the blue dress she'd worn to the winter fair, the one she'd danced in, the one that had started tongues wagging. It seemed fitting to marry in it, to transform a source of gossip into a memory of joy. Toby insisted on wearing his Sunday best, though he complained about the stiff collar. "Mama would have wanted me to look nice," he said, then caught himself. "My first mama. She would have," Clara agreed. "And you can have two mamas, you know, the one who loved you first and lives in your memory, and the one who loves you now and makes your breakfast." "Two mamas," Toby mused. "Samuel only has 1.5. His stepmother doesn't like being called Mama." The preacher arrived precisely at 10, looking uncomfortable but determined. Reverend Campbell might not approve of Clara, but he wouldn't shirk his duty. With him came the witnesses' doctor, Morrison and his wife, one of the few couples in town who'd been kind to Clara from the start. "Couldn't have a wedding without witnesses." "Mrs." Morrison said warmly. "And flowers. Every bride needs flowers." She produced a bouquet of wildflowers, clearly picked that morning, tied with a white ribbon. Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you. I didn't think—" "That's what neighbors are for." "Doctor," Morrison said gruffly. "Thinking of things? Now. Shall we begin?" They gathered in the parlor, sunlight streaming through windows Clara had cleaned just days before. It was simple, unadorned. Nothing like the society wedding she'd once planned with Richard. But as she stood beside Wyatt, Toby between them holding both their hands, Clara knew this was perfect. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Campbell began, and Clara barely heard the familiar words. She was too aware of Wyatt's steady presence, of Toby's small fingers gripped tight in hers, of this moment that would divide her life into before and after. "Do you, Wyatt James Langston, take this woman?" "I do." The words came strong and certain. "Do you, Clara Jean Whitlock, take this man?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt. "The ring." Toby proudly produced the simple gold band from his pocket. "I kept it safe, Papa, just like you said." Wyatt slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, his hands steady. "With this ring, I thee wed. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife." Reverend Campbell closed his prayer book. "You may kiss your bride." Wyatt cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her softly, mindful of their audience. But Clara felt the promise in it, the joy, the relief of finally being where they belonged. "Is it done?" Toby asked. "Are we official?" "We're official," Wyatt confirmed, not taking his eyes off Clara. "Good," Toby declared. "Can we have cake now?" The small reception that followed was quiet but joyful. Mrs. Morrison had indeed thought of everything: a simple cake, fresh bread, cold chicken. They ate at the kitchen table like any other day, except Clara wore Wyatt's ring and Toby called her Mama without hesitation. After the guests departed, the three of them stood on the porch, watching the afternoon shadows grow long. "No honeymoon trip," Clara said. "I hope you're not disappointed." "Why would I want to go anywhere else?" Wyatt pulled her close. "Everything I want is right here." "Mama," Toby said experimentally. "Mama, can we still have lessons tomorrow?" "Of course. Marriage doesn't mean I stop teaching you." "Good. Samuel said stepmothers don't like teaching. But you're not a stepmother. You're just Mama." That evening, after Toby was asleep, Clara moved her few belongings into what was now their bedroom. Wyatt helped, carrying her dresses, her books, the small treasures she'd accumulated in her months here. "I kept Margaret's things," he said as she hung her dresses beside his shirts. "Her jewelry, her letters. For Toby, when he's older. Does that bother you?" "No." Clara turned from the wardrobe. "She's part of your story, part of Toby's. I wouldn't want to erase that." "You're remarkable. You know that." "I'm practical," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." They prepared for bed with the careful choreography of new intimacy. When Clara emerged from behind the changing screen in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, Wyatt's breath caught. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I'm too tall, too plain." "You're my wife," he interrupted, "and you're perfect." Later, lying in the darkness with Wyatt's arm around her, Clara stared at the ceiling and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From St. Louis society to a Wyoming ranch, from abandoned fiancé to beloved wife, from loneliness to belonging. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt murmured against her hair. "About trains," Clara said. "How they take you places you never expected to go. Are you glad that you got on that train?" "Every day," she said, "even the hard days, especially the hard days." "No regrets." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "How could I regret the thing that brought me home?" Dawn would come soon enough, bringing chores and lessons and all the ordinary tasks of ranch life. The town would gossip about their quick wedding. There would be challenges, there always were, but lying there in the darkness with her husband's heartbeat steady beneath her palm, Clara knew she'd found what she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just love, though that was part of it. Not just family, though that mattered more than she could say. But purpose, place, the deep satisfaction of being needed and wanted and chosen. Not despite who she was, but because of it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Wyatt replied. "My brave, practical, perfect Clara." Outside, a train whistle echoed across the valley, the late westbound, carrying its cargo of dreams and desperate chances. Clara listened to it fade and smiled. Somewhere on that train might be another woman running from disappointment, heading toward an unknown future. Clara wished her well, wished her the same unexpected grace that had stopped a train on a cold February morning and changed everything. But that was another story. This one hers. Theirs was just beginning. And as sleep finally claimed her, Clara's last thought was of tomorrow. Ordinary tomorrow, with burnt porridge and arithmetic lessons and Toby's laughter filling the house. Tomorrow, when she would wake as Clara Langston and know herself home. The train whistle faded into silence. The stars wheeled overhead. And in a ranch house in Wyoming, a new family slept peaceful and whole. Proof that sometimes the best journeys are the ones you never planned to take. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening at home? During your commute, or perhaps while working? Please share your thoughts in the comments below so we can connect and discuss this journey together. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love and courage from the American frontier.